Hi everybody, it's Jim. Welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. Time for a reading update. It's Friday, October 17th, 2025. Beautiful fall day. And I have a few updates for you. So I think I've finished 3 books in the last week. And then I have a mini book haul purchase I made on eBay of 3 books. And I want to talk about those with you today. So we'll jump right to it. And we'll share some excerpts from some of these books. I guess I'll start with this one. It's The Great Cities, Jerusalem. And this is a Time Life series picture book with text. And it was published in the mid to late 1970s. And I really enjoyed this book. This book's been on our shelf for literally decades, probably since the early 90s, if not the late 80s. And I finally got around to reading it. So the author is Colin Thubron, who was born in London, and he is a descendant of John Dryden, the famous English poet. So that was cool. And anyway, this, again, was 1976. It was published. But it's basically a profile of this great city. It gives you a lot of the history of Jerusalem, and it's also travel writing. So Colin Thubron is like walking around Jerusalem and encountering different people, all the different cultures who live there. He covers all the major religions, and it was a much better written book than I thought it would be. You know, usually with books like this, True Confessions, I just look at the pictures and I very rarely read the text. I'll look at the pictures, I'll read the captions, and that's about it. Well, for this one, I read the whole text, and it was actually a lot more text than I thought it was. It really felt like reading a book. And I want to share an excerpt from this to give you a bit of a flavor of his style. I thought he was a really fine writer. I don't know what else he has written, or if he's still alive, but this was pretty well done. So I'll just cut in here and read from page 15 and then on to a couple other pages. So we'll just cut in here. This is like gives you a little bit of the travel writing, like on the site feel. Towards evening, as I walked along the old city's arteries, the streets of El Wad and Khan Zayt, Christian and David Street, its people were taking their traditional leisure, seated in the coffee shops on reed-bottomed chairs with their small cups placed delicately on other chairs in front of them or cradled in their hands. Some played backgammon with histrionic cries and gestures so that small crowds gathered about them. We have a little picture spread of the desert outside of Jerusalem. Others talked in the murmurous privacy with which Levantine peoples discuss politics, grouped in sad and vaguely suspicious circles. Tired and older men, their heads swathed in the Arab kafiyeh or crowned with a fez, sucked on their hookahs in silence and fell asleep. People have rarely lived to a great age here. Even before his 60s, an Arab may gather in his face all the sags and lines of a century. When I leaned for a moment in a doorway and watched passers-by, I noticed how many lame there were. Jerusalem's medical services are today among the best in the Middle East, yet the past still weighs heavy here. Every second person looked sick in body, and up and down the hill alleys the sticks of the blind tapped incessantly. I made my way into the Christian quarter near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. The streets were filled with monks and Jewish tourists, and Arab masons covered in dust were driving their loaded donkeys up the lanes. The presence of so many priests gave the feeling of a religious convocation. Their sandals crunched and slapped in the dust. Their robes and cowls brushed between Israeli soldiers and Americans in jeans. The Christian Arab shopkeepers, a little wealthier than their Muslim counterparts, a little more suave, murmured greetings and invitations. In such streets where all traffic goes on foot, the human voice, arguing, muttering, cajoling, is the loudest sound heard. From the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the most sacred sanctuary in Christendom, it is a 5-minute walk to the Wailing Wall, the holiest site of Jewry. And above the wall, the Dome of the Rock, one of Islam's greatest shrines, flowers to the sky. From these 3 monuments, like planted seeds, the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim quarters have grown. And if the Christian is commercial and the Muslim crowded and poor, the Jewish quarter is fiercely rebuilding itself as a symbol of national redemption. Immediately after the 6-Day War, the Moroccan quarter around the Wailing Wall was blown up to clear a space for worship. And now the sun beats shadowless on a vast and blinding pavement. The wall rises hugely beyond it, and high above the golden dome of the rock shines like a setting sun. The size and permanence of the wall are Roman, built in the calm of a great empire. But if you stand closer, you see that for all their mass, these stones are sympathetic, individual. Some, cut from the hard mesa limestone, have kept their edges sharp and perfect. Others, scooped from the softer malaki, are wrinkled like hands along the veins of their weakness, horizontal or vertical as they were laid, or have split savagely inward through their entire depth. Against their eternity, the men murmur and sway in prayer. Their heads reach only to the second course of stones. Their hands touch them with an automatic love. Sometimes a wind comes to twirl their prayer shawls about their shoulders or ruffle the pages of their books, but their worship stays private and intense. Each seems to hold communion with the ancient stone in front of him. One legend tells that when Solomon erected the temple, he assigned the building of each part to a different class, and that this wall was raised by the beggars. On the day of the temple's destruction, angels linked their wings about the wall and cried, "This, the work of the poor, shall never be destroyed." Since then, the divine presence has never left it, and on dewy evenings, they say the stones weep for the temple's fall. On some days, especially during the confirmation of boys, the wall becomes a theater of rejoicing. The tapping of hand drums and the ululation of the women, craning over the barrier that separates them from the men, drowns out the sad bray of the shofar horn. Piety and tourism mingle. While the Orthodox sway and murmur as if drunk with their prayer, Jews from America or France photograph one another in borrowed skull caps. But usually the place is almost silent. At noon, the slanting sun, swinging vertical to the stones, picks out every crease in them, while pigeons waddle in their crevices. Only on festivals and on the anniversary of the temple's fall does the whisper of the faithful swell to a confused, heart-rending roar. For the palace that lies desolate, cries one. We sit in solitude and mourn, the chorus answers. For the walls that are overthrown, we sit in solitude and mourn. For our glory which is departed, for our wise men who have perished, for the priests who have stumbled, for our kings who have despised him, we sit in solitude and mourn. In Jerusalem, more evidently than anywhere, man is bound to his past, a past which is all about him in every stone and trampled hill. Yet the very richness of this past is daunting to the stranger. How to understand such a tumult of peoples, buildings, beliefs? In a single street may walk men of 20 different sects, in whose faces you may see the blood of Turkish soldiers, Byzantine merchants, Crusader knights. Well, may the traveler ask in bewilderment if he will ever understand such a place. only history can explain, a history still alive in flesh and rock. And it is this that I will set out to explore, not by cold research, but by walking streets and meeting men. And that is Colin Thubron, Jerusalem, Time Life series. Very well written book. I learned a ton about Jerusalem. I was studying the maps. I was walking around with him virtually. There was like a few, I really liked the section on the Wailing Wall and the Dome of the Rock, and the section about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was bizarre because I didn't really know much about the history of that place. I don't know if it's still the same today, but with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he gets into this whole talk about how the sanctuary is kind of shared by different faiths, and like they each have their own little chapels inside, and it's a real mishmash, and it's kind of like bizarre. And I liked how he didn't whitewash it either. You know, he's very attuned to all the problems with Jerusalem, the complexities of the history, the recent history. This was again from the 70s, where you had the the Israelis had taken over and were now in charge, and Jerusalem was like building up like outside the old city, and he doesn't shine it. This is kind of a gritty place that's got a long tortured history, but you really felt like you were there. And, I have no plans to go to Jerusalem. It would be a cool bucket list thing to do someday, but, I'm not, let's be realistic. I don't think I want to go there right now, given the state of that region, but I can travel there virtually through a book like this. So, like, excellent photography. Photographs by Jay Meisel. I should give him credit, too. Really, really fine stuff. So that was a good read. That took me a little longer to read it than I thought I was. The second book I finished is John Irving, The Cider House Rules. I finally got through this monster. It's a pretty long book. John Irving, I don't think he's for everybody, but I really like his fiction on the whole. And I thought this was one of the better novels that I've read. Now I'm trying to remember the ones I've read. World According to Garp, Hotel New Hampshire, now Cider House Rules, A Prayer for Owen Meany, Avenue of Mysteries, and The Last Chairlift, which are two very recent books by him. I would put this one near the top of the list. So I would say of the ones that I have read, my favorites so far are World According to Garp, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and The Cider House Rules, and in no particular order. I think I probably like Garp first, but that was my first Irving novel, so that might be I might be biased because of that. But I was actually surprised at how much this rose in my estimation as I was reading. I didn't expect it to be one of the better Updike books, but my feeling was Updike. What am I talking about? Irving books. So I really got the sense of reading this, and I think this was the novel that probably came out after Hotel New Hampshire, which is not a favorite of mine, but I really felt like Irving was like in his prime in this period. This book and then A Prayer for Owen Meany, which might have been the one that followed this, like are very well done for what he likes to do. So what is the story of? I'll just try to keep it brief. It's about an orphanage in St. Cloud, Maine, which is run by Dr. Wilbur Larch, obstetrician, who, of course, delivers babies for the mothers who are going to hand off their babies to the orphanage. But he also, on the sly, performs abortions. And at this point in U.S. history, abortion was illegal. This is back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. So you get the history of that place, and a lot of the orphans are characters, but the main protagonist of the book is Homer Wells, one of the orphans, who for one reason or another never gets adopted. So he basically grows up as a child of the orphanage, and he's very well beloved, and he becomes like the medical protege of Dr. Larch, and Dr. Larch is grooming him to eventually take over duties once, he gets old and passes on. But they're also on the lookout for, sending him off and finding him a home. But anyway, so that's one of the main settings is St. Cloud orphanage there, which is sort of in the middle of nowhere in Maine. And then the other setting is Ocean View Orchards, which is on the coastal Maine. And this is where Homer Wells goes when he leaves the orphanage. So this novel is also a coming-of-age story about Homer Wells. And the two of the characters, Candy and Wally, who live back at the orphanage, they need an abortion, so that's what brings them up to St. Cloud. And then they bring Homer, they get to know Homer, and they bring him back to spend the summer there, but then that turns into a much longer term stay for years and years. And then a lot of plot complications happen, lots of twists. You have a interesting story plot line of Melanie, one of the other orphans, who was like the girlfriend of Homer in the orphanage. She's a real kind of wild woman, turbulent rebel type. She eventually runs away, and then it's kind of searching for Homer. So there's that angle, and then Wally goes off to World War II. I don't want to give too much away here. He becomes like a pilot in Burma, in Asia, and then sort of a love triangle develops where, we got Homer, we've got Wally, we got Candy. Well, Homer falls in love with Candy, she falls in love with him, but she's also in love with Wally. And, they try to make that work. And then more births happen and relationships wax and wane. And then like some very interesting twists towards the end, which I won't get into. Some of the plot is contrived, but you kind of expect that, and I accepted it. And I would say there's also an intertextuality to the book, so it speaks to other novels. John Irving was a big fan of 19th century fiction, and so you have lots of mention of David Copperfield and Great Expectations and Jane Eyre, and they play a key role in the book, both as in terms of kind of what's going on, but also in terms of themes, because Dickens wrote a lot about orphans and things like that. Another big theme, of course, is birth and abortion and the ethics of that. So that's like a huge theme. You can really learn a lot about that. A lot of the details about that kind of medicine is things that I knew nothing about, but I thought it felt very authentic, like it was well researched. And then also, in that Ocean View orchard setting, there's a lot in here about apples, about making cider, picking apples, growing the apple trees and all that. And there's a subplot with these migrant workers that come up from the South, African Americans, and they figure in the storyline too. Won't give too much away there, but with a lot of good twists. I just was, the longer I read it, the more I got into it. And I would say I mainly love this book for the characters. I think that's what John Irving does best. This is character-driven fiction. Really fell in love with the Homer Wells character and Wilbur Larch and Melanie and Candy and Wally and all the others. Lots of good side characters too. The supporting cast, they're very well drawn. So yeah, it takes you someplace. I felt like I was in Maine, and yeah, it was a great read. Recommend it for anyone who's into that. And I thought, another big theme in the book, aside from like abortion and birth and death and love and things like that, it's also about secrecy and deception, because that's, again, I don't want to give too much away here, but there's things that happen that are very contrived and secretive, and then those secrets in some cases have to come out, and people have to face the music. So this was, it's a slow burn. It's a slow read. That's John Irving. He writes long novels. They take me a long time to read. Very slow paced. That might not be to everyone's liking, but I liked it. And I thought this was one of his better books that I have read. So was pleasantly surprised. It's too bad I waited so long to read it, because this is another one we've had on the shelf for decades. But I finally got around to it. So hooray for me. Okay. Now, let's get on to the book haul and the other book I finished today, which is actually one of the book haul books. So I got, I guess I'll do the book haul first, and then I'll talk about the one I finished. So this is the one I finished, is Proust by Samuel Beckett. It's a very short book. And of course, I reread Proust in the newer translations, Penguin Deluxe Classics, this year. And then I read the Roger Shattuck book about Proust. I forget the name of it. I covered it on the channel. I think I still have it. Do I still have it? Or I don't even know if I have it anymore. Anyway, I'll check my records. But anyway, he talks about this. Roger Shattuck talks about this book. I've heard about it elsewhere. And this one's in paperback edition. It was published by Evergreen Grove Press. So this is a vintage paperback. I can't get the date, but I want to say it's the 50s or 60s this came out. Originally came out in 1931. But anyway, this is a book of criticism. So this is a famous writer who wasn't famous yet. This was a young Samuel Beckett writing this book about the famous author Proust. That's always a lot of fun to see what big name authors think about other big name authors. And I was really excited to find this on eBay at a good price, because I've been searching for it for a few months, and it's been like on my saved searches. And this is not a cheap book in most instances. Like, it was more than I wanted to pay for it. Whether it's hardcover or paperback, it's like, I don't want to pay that much. I think I found this for $8, and I thought, I'm not going to find this for cheaper than that anytime soon, so I'm going to get this. And then this was from Better World Books, one of these like massive eBay booksellers. So they had, buy 3, get 10% off deal. So I came up with a couple other books to get, and that was a children's literature book called The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, with illustrations by Jules Pfeiffer. And this is published by Scholastic. Now, this is a book that you would think I have nostalgia for, because this is, back from my day and age. This would have been a book that I could have read, but I'd never read this book. I might have heard of the title before, and I know Jules Pfeiffer's illustrations from elsewhere, because he was a pretty famous illustrator, but I didn't know much about this book. But we were visiting with friends a couple months ago, and we were having a conversation, and I guess we were talking about books. And one of my friends, he said, he really liked this book when he was a kid, and he kind of was remembering it, and they were talking about it. And then, like, the other friend, Miriam, she's a school teacher. She's elementary school teacher, and she has taught this book before, so she knew a lot about it. And I felt like the odd man out, like I don't know what they were talking about, but they certainly got me interested in it. So I wrote it down, and I've been, whenever I stop in the used bookshops, or libraries. I haven't done many library sales lately, but like the used bookshops, I always kind of look for it, and it has not come up. So when I found the Proust book, I added this to my cart. Then I searched for this, same seller. It came up at a real good price. I'm like, add to cart, let's do it. And then I needed one more to get the 10% off. So I went with this one, Pierre or the Ambiguities by Herman Melville. And this book I have read before, but I like these editions. This is Northwestern University Press, and these are they're called the approved text of the Center for Editions of American Authors in the Modern Language Association. So they're kind of like officially sanctioned, and recent editions. This edition was published in third printing in 1999. First published in 1971 is Volume 7 of the Northwestern Newberry edition of the writings of Herman Melville. Okay, so I thought, well, I don't know why it came to mind. I was looking for some other stuff that's on my want list, and they didn't have it. And I thought, let me see if they have this. And they did. So I'm like, okay, I'll get it. And it was cheap, and single-digit price. So anyway, I thought, I read this decades ago, and I might be up for a reread soon. I'm a big Melville fan. And I could swear that, I'd no longer have the mass market size paperback copy. Well, lo and behold, right after I ordered this, I was like foraging in the basement, and I found my original copy that I read all those years ago. I still have it. This is a Signet, right? Signet Classics edition. And this book is, well, let me start with this, then I'll kind of work backwards up the chain. This is the mini haul, but let me talk about this first. So Pierre, I'll read you the back copy here. Written 1 year after Moby Dick, so it's important for that reason. Melville's Pierre, 1852, was, as its author claimed, much more calculated for popularity. It was to be a regular romance with a mysterious plot to it and stirring passions at work, representing a new and elevated aspect of American life. Yet far from being the rural bowl of milk he assured his readers it would be, Melville's novel turns Gothic, overwhelmed by a multitude of ambiguities. When Pierre Glendinning's lifelong desire for a sister is seemingly realized on the eve of his marriage, his world is suddenly turned upside down, for he must choose between acknowledging his illegitimate half-sister and perpetuating his unsullied family legacy. In Pierre, his first fiction set on land, Melville unfolds the story of an idealistic young man whose steadfast beliefs lead him to destroy his world and himself. And just to compare that back cover copy, let's go to the Signet Classics and see what they say about it. Parody, 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 and an odd assortment of parody procedures will be found throughout the context which Melville builds around the central narrative of Pierre's pilgrim-like progress to defeat and damnation. Thus writes Lawrence Thompson, describing this story of the downfall of a high-born young man whose unselfish love entraps him in an incestuous passion, and whose noble actions hasten his ignoble end. In theme and style, The novel mocks both Christian allegory and the cheerful pastoral romances of the day, but neither irony nor virtuosity can mask its underlying seriousness of purpose or the dark vision which shapes it. Written immediately after Moby Dick, Pierre represents Melville's further exploration of the meaning and nature of evil, a dramatic expression of its author's most profound anxieties and obsessions. It stands as a strangely compelling creation of an intensely troubled, eternally questioning mind. As William Ellery Sedgwick has written, Pierre was the only book of Melville's maturity as ambitious as Moby Dick. I like the back cover copy better on this one than on this one, but this also has a historical note at the end where you get into a very detailed reception history of this book. Long story short, this was, when Moby Dick came out, it was not popular. People didn't know what the hell that book was about. It didn't sell well, and people wanted Melville to write his old seafaring travel-themed fiction like he did in the early days of Taipei and Omu. And so anyway, you got to believe Melville felt like he was, misunderstood. So here was this kind of desperate attempt to write something that would be more popular, like a pastoral romance novel, and it's not successfully doing that. So the critics, the reviewers, when this book came out, hated it, and that's an understatement. They savaged it in the press, and the book was a total disaster. It was a total flop, and really, Melville's fiction never recovered. I think he might have published a couple more books after that. I think The Confidence Man came out after this. But at some point, he just quit writing fiction until Billy Budd, which came out, I think, after he died. Like, that was posthumously published or right before he died. And then he turned to poetry, actually, and wrote a lot of poetry. But he just kind of faded into obscurity and was not the famous Herman Melville that we all know and love. He was just basically thought of as a disaster. Let me read you some of the savage criticism of this book. And buckle up, because this stuff, these 19th century reviewers did not pull punches. Here's from the New York Herald, 1852. In fiction, Herman Melville has a new book, in which it is understood that he has dressed up and exhibited in Berkshire, where he is living, some of the ancient and most repulsive inventions of the George Walker and Anne Radcliffe sort, desperate passion at first sight for a young woman who turns out to be the hero's sister, and so on and so on and so on. It is conceded that Mr. Melville has written himself out. How about this from the New York Day Book? We were somewhat startled at the remark, but still more at learning a few days after that Melville was really supposed to be deranged and that his friends were taking measures to place him under treatment. We hope one of the earliest precautions will be to keep him stringently secluded from pen and ink. So people thought the man went mad. Here is from the New York Herald, September 18th. One long, brain-muddling, soul-bewildering ambiguity, to borrow Mr. Melville's style, like Melchizedek without beginning or end, a labyrinth without a clue, an Irish bog without so much as a jack-o'-lantern to guide the wanderer's footsteps, the dream of a distempered stomach, disordered by a hasty supper on half-cooked pork chops. Here's another clip from Graham's. The spirit pervading the whole book is intolerably unhealthy, and the most friendly reader is obliged at the end to protest against such a provoking perversion of talent and waste of power. Okay, this is from the Whig Review as well. Our last quote, slamming Pierre by Herman Melville. Now, in this matter, Mr. Melville has done a very serious thing, a thing which not even unsoundness of intellect could excuse. He might have been mad to the very pinnacle of insanity. He might have torn our poor language into tatters and made from the shreds a harlequin suit in which to play his tricks. He might have piled up word upon word and adjective upon adjective until he had built a pyramid of nonsense which should last to the admiration of all men. He might have done all this and a great deal more, and we should not have complained. But when he dares to outrage every principle of virtue, when he strikes with an impious though happily weak hand at the very foundations of society, we feel it our duty to tear off the veil with which he has thought to soften the hideous features of the idea and warn the public against the reception of such atrocious doctrines. Yeah, they hated it. They hated it. The book was a complete flop, and Melville faded into obscurity, which is all the more reason to read it in my book, right? So here's what I remember about reading this the first time. And again, this was probably like 30 years ago, so forgive me for not, having, a photographic memory. I thought the book kind of like bifurcates. Like the beginning is, it kind of like, oh, this seems like a happy little pastoral romance, and it's kind of skipping and frolicking along. And then like about halfway through, it like turns and gets like super dark and, incestuous and just broiling and just rancid and tragic. And it's like the style shifts and so anyway, to me, it read like this back copy said, this cover said, it's kind of like parody, like he was maybe writing a parody of these romances. And it's almost like he got tired of doing that midway through. And he's like, okay, now I'm just going to go full bore into Herman Melville mode and just kind of like go for the jugular. And like, let's just take this, run this through its course and make it as rancid and disgusting and like tragic as possible, or bitter. It is a kind of a mess of a book, but the book has been better received in the 20th century and now 21st century than it was in the 19th century. And there have been some, attempts to revive its reputation and see it as more of a darkly psychological novel than as, all the things they were criticizing back in the day. Anyway, this is not a book I'm going to get to right away, but I think one day I will reread it in this edition because, hey, listen, I kept it all these years. There must be a reason why I kept it, because maybe I wanted to come back to it and revisit it and rethink it. I didn't dislike it the first time through. The book made me think. Is it his greatest book? No, by no means. But in terms of the placement in his career, I think it's fascinating. It's like just like fascinating from a literary history angle, but also as a work of art. It's something to think about. Like this, Melville's career always intrigues me because he was so misunderstood. He was so popular at first, and then he came down, and then just kind of frittered away into total obscurity, like a footnote, a literal footnote in literary history, until about the 1920s, when people like Lewis Mumford were singing his praises again. And now we think of Moby Dick as one of the great American novels. But nobody really, maybe aside from Hawthorne, knew that in Melville's lifetime. But anyway, that's that. Now let's go back to the Phantom Tollbooth, and I want to read you from the first chapter here. If you're not familiar with this book, I'm about 3 or 4 chapters into it already, and it's very charming. I really, really like this book. So this is how it's a much lighter note than Pierre or the Ambiguities. Starts with a chapter called Milo. There once was a boy named Milo who didn't know what to do with himself, not just sometimes, but always. When he was in school, he longed to be out, and when he was out, he longed to be in. On the way, he thought about coming home, and coming home, he thought about going. Wherever he was, he wished he were somewhere else, and when he got there, he wondered why he'd bothered. Nothing really interested him, least of all the things that should have. It seems to me that almost everything is a waste of time, he remarked one day as he walked dejectedly home from school. I can't see the point in learning to solve useless problems or subtracting turnips from turnips or knowing where Ethiopia is or how to spell February. And since no one bothered to explain otherwise, he regarded the process of seeking knowledge as the greatest waste of time of all. There's a little illustration, Jules Pfeiffer. As he and his unhappy thoughts hurried along, for while he was never anxious to be where he was going, he liked to get there as quickly as possible. It seemed a great wonder of the world that the world which was so large could sometimes feel so small and empty. And worst of all, he continued sadly, there's nothing for me to do, nowhere I'd care to go, and hardly anything worth seeing. He punctuated this last thought with such a deep sigh that a house sparrow singing nearby stopped and rushed home to be with his family. Without stopping or looking up, he rushed past the buildings and busy shops that lined the street, and in a few minutes reached home, dashed through the lobby, hopped onto the elevator, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and off again, opened the apartment door, rushed into his room, flopped dejectedly into a chair, and grumbled softly, another long afternoon. He looked glumly at all the things he owned, the books that were too much trouble to read, the tools he'd never learned to use, the small electric automobile he hadn't driven in months, or was it years, and the hundreds of other games and toys and bats and balls and bits and pieces scattered around him. And then, to one side of the room, just next to the phonograph, he noticed something he had certainly never seen before. Who could possibly have left such an enormous package, and a strange one? For while it was not quite square, it was definitely not round, and for its size, it was larger than almost any other big package of smaller dimension that he'd ever seen. Attached to one side was a bright blue envelope which said simply, "For Milo, who has plenty of time." Of course, if you've ever gotten a surprise package, you can imagine how puzzled and excited Milo was, and if you've never gotten one, pay close attention, because someday you might. I don't think it's my birthday, he puzzled, and Christmas must be months away, and I haven't been outstandingly good, or even good at all. He had to admit this even to himself. Most probably I won't like it anyway, but since I don't know where it came from, I can't possibly send it back. He thought about it for quite a while and then opened the envelope, but just to be polite. One genuine turnpike toll booth, it stated, and then it went on, easily assembled at home and for use by those who have never traveled in lands beyond. And then off he goes on this journey, an imaginary journey through the phantom toll booth. And we have a little map here that gives you a sense of where he's going to travel. Yeah, like I said, so far, loving this book, really charming, and I feel like it's like a lost childhood I'm reclaiming, because I didn't get this the first time around when I was a real kid. So it's really cool to finally see this book, which I had not, for some reason, I just didn't get exposed to it as a kid. Wasn't taught to me, didn't take it out of the library, wasn't recommended to me. But thanks to those friends who had, lots of nostalgia for it, now I can participate in that. So yeah, the Phantom Tollbooth, looking forward to reading it. I don't think it's going to take me more than a few days to get through it. And then finally, we'll come back to Proust by Samuel Beckett. So I did finish this. This is the third book I finished. I just finished it this morning. It only took a couple of days. The book is really more like a long essay. It's 72 pages. And yet, it's pretty dense. It's tough going. Beckett, is a really smart writer, and he kind of operates on his own level. He's on a penthouse level of the apartment house. I'm down here on a lower level. He can see much more than I can. He knows more than I do. And he's writing some pretty challenging prose here, but it's also good prose in a lot of ways. So I think this book is best in. I really feel like he understands Proust. He understands what Proust was all about, what Proust was trying to do, and it's particularly strong on a few themes. So Beckett talks a lot about habit. He talks a lot about time and memory, of course. He talks about love, spends a lot of time on sort of the Albertine storyline. He talks about the role of music in the book a little bit and a few other themes. But the centerpiece of this is, I think, Beckett's criticism, his comments on involuntary memory in Proust, In Search of Lost Time. So I wanted to read a little bit of that part that made a little more sense to me. There is no great difference, says Proust, between the memory of a dream and the memory of reality. When the sleeper awakes, this emissary of his habit assures him that his personality has not disappeared with his fatigue. It is possible for those that take an interest in such speculations to consider the resurrection of the soul as a final piece of impertinence from the same source. It insists on that most necessary, wholesome, and monotonous plagiarism, the plagiarism of oneself. This thoroughgoing Democrat makes no distinction between the pensée of Pascal and a soap advertisement. In fact, if habit is the goddess of dullness, voluntary memory is Shadwell and of Irish extraction. Involuntary memory is explosive, an immediate, total, and delicious deflagration. It restores not merely the past object, but the Lazarus that it charmed or tortured, but not merely Lazarus and the object, but more because less, more because it abstracts the useful, the opportune, the accidental, because in its flame it has consumed habit and all its works, and in its brightness revealed what the mock reality of experience never can and never will reveal, the real. But involuntary memory is an unruly magician and will not be importuned. It chooses its own time and place for the performance of its miracle. I do not know how often this miracle recurs in Proust. I think 12 or 13 times. But the first, the famous episode of the Madeleine steeped in tea, would justify the assertion that his entire book is a monument to involuntary memory and the epic of its action. I'll stop there. So you can hear what I'm talking about with this kind of high style, but also very unique prose. There's some poetry in there, and it's I can imagine rereading this because, a lot of it went way above my head, but some of it seemed really profound and just rich, deep and rich and high. I'm like, wow, okay, cool. All right, so that is my reading update, a very, very long reading update. A 3-book mini haul, 3 books completed, and let me know what you all have been reading. If you have comments on these books I've read, let me know. Participate in the comments. That's always welcome. Thanks so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, hope you become a subscriber. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.